Ethan Sinclair stepped into the small diner at the corner of the street, his sharp eyes scanning the cozy interior. He was supposed to be at an exclusive business dinner in one of the city's most prestigious restaurants, but something about this place drew him in. From the outside, the diner looked unremarkable, just a modest establishment, with a faded sign that read Molly's Diner, the kind of place most people would walk past without a second glance. But as he stepped inside, the warm, rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, stirring something deep inside him. He had been here before, or at least somewhere like this. The atmosphere was unlike anything he was used to. No pretentious waiters, no hushed conversations over overpriced wine. Instead, the diner was filled with the gentle clinking of plates, the low hum of conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter from a table in the corner. It was a stark contrast to the cold corporate world he had built for himself, a world where success was measured in millions, where time was money, and where genuine connections had become a luxury he could no longer afford. As he walked toward an empty booth near the window, he could feel a few curious glances in his direction. It wasn't surprising his tailored Armani suit, polished Italian leather shoes, and Rolex watch made him look completely out of place in this humble setting, but he didn't care. Something about this diner made him stay. A young waitress approached, her notepad in hand and a polite smile on her lips. "Good evening. What can I get you?" Ethan barely glanced at the menu. "Just coffee for now. Coming right up." As the waitress walked away, Ethan leaned back in his seat, absently loosening his watch as he let his gaze wander. Despite the simplicity of the diner, there was something charming about it. The checkered tablecloths, the faded but well-loved menus, the comforting smell of home-cooked meals reminded him of something. Or rather, someone. Maya Evans. The name surfaced in his mind so suddenly that it nearly startled him. Maya had been one of his closest friends in college. Back then, he had been just another ambitious business major, full of dreams but with little to his name. And Maya? She had been the one person who had always believed in him. She had been there during the late-night study sessions at the campus library, bringing him coffee when he was exhausted. She had been there when he doubted himself, telling him he was destined for great things. And more than that, she had been the first girl he ever loved. But he had never told her. They had always been close, but life had pulled them in different directions after graduation. He had been recruited by an investment firm straight out of college, working his way up until he started his own company. Meanwhile, Maya had... Ethan frowned. He had lost track of her. He had always assumed she had followed her dream of becoming a writer. She had talked about it endlessly in college, how she wanted to publish a book, how she wanted to tell stories that mattered. And yet, he hadn't heard her name in years. As he pondered the thought, the waitress returned with his coffee. "Here you go." "Thanks." He barely acknowledged her, his mind still stuck on memories of Maya. He took a sip, his eyes drifting to the counter, where another waitress had just stepped out of the kitchen, balancing a tray of food in her hands. And in that moment, his world stopped. The woman turned, her dark brown hair pulled into a messy bun, a few loose strands framing her familiar face. Maya. Ethan's grip on his coffee cup tightened. It had been nearly a decade since he had last seen her. And yet, here she was, not at a book signing, not at a fancy literary event, but working as a waitress in a small diner. He felt like the wind had been knocked out of him. How was this possible? He watched as she moved between tables, smiling warmly at customers, chatting with ease as if she belonged here. She looked different, not in a bad way, but changed. Back in college, she had always been full of life, full of dreams. She had talked endlessly about all the things she wanted to do, all the places she wanted to see. But now she was here, in a diner, waiting tables, and he couldn't understand why. Ethan's mind raced with questions, but before he could process them, Maya turned and their eyes met. For a second, time seemed to freeze. Her eyes widened, her lips parting slightly as recognition flickered across her face. "Ethan?" Her voice was soft, disbelieving. He felt a lump form in his throat. "Maya." She blinked, as if trying to confirm that he was actually there. Then, slowly, a smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "I can't believe it," she murmured. "What are you doing here?" Ethan let out a breathless chuckle, shaking his head. "I could ask you the same thing." For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. Years of distance, of unspoken words, of paths that had diverged too soon. And yet, here they were. Ethan had spent his entire life chasing success, believing that money and power were the only things that mattered. But seeing Maya again like this made him realize something. Maybe the things that truly mattered were the ones he had left behind. Ethan stared at Maya, his mind struggling to catch up with reality. Of all the people he had expected to see tonight, Maya Evans had never crossed his mind. And certainly not like this, wearing a simple waitress uniform, holding a tray, standing in a small diner when she had once dreamed of so much more. She looked different from how he remembered, yet still so familiar. Her deep brown eyes, filled with ambition, now held something else. Resignation? Fatigue? He couldn't tell. And that troubled him. But before he could say another word, Maya seemed to snap out of her daze and let out a soft chuckle. "Wow, it's really you." Ethan found himself smiling. "It's really me." Maya shook her head in amusement, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. I never expected to see you here. I mean, the Ethan Sinclair I knew wouldn't be caught dead in a place like this." "Hey," Ethan protested playfully, though he knew she wasn't entirely wrong. "I happen to like diners." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? So you're telling me Mr. Billionaire doesn't only eat at Michelin-starred restaurants now?" Ethan smirked, resting his arm on the table. "What can I say? I'm a man of surprises." Maya shook her head with a soft laugh, but there was something else in her expression: hesitation, as if she wasn't sure how to feel about seeing him again. And Ethan understood. It had been nearly 10 years since they had last spoken. They had been inseparable in college, but after graduation, he had left. He had thrown himself into the world of finance, working tirelessly to build his empire. He had never looked back. And in doing so, he had lost touch with one of the only people who had ever truly mattered to him. The weight of that realization settled heavily in his chest. "Can you sit for a moment?" Ethan asked, hoping she'd say yes. Maya glanced around. The diner was busy, and she was obviously on shift. But after a brief pause, she sighed. "I have a break in 5 minutes." Ethan's lips curved into a small smile. "I'll wait." Maya hesitated for just a second before nodding. "All right." Then, just like that, she turned and walked toward the counter. Ethan watched her go, his mind racing. Why was Maya working here? What had happened to her dreams? Had life been unkind to her? And more importantly, why did he care so much? Because deep down, he knew the answer. He had never stopped caring. Ethan watched as Maya disappeared behind the counter, his fingers absently tracing the rim of his coffee cup. His mind was a mess. 10 years. A whole decade had passed since he last saw her, since they laughed over late-night coffee, studied for finals in the library, and talked about their dreams as if the world belonged to them. But time had a cruel way of pulling people apart. Back then, he had been too focused on building his career, on proving himself. He had moved to New York right after graduation, drowning in long hours, risky investments, and endless meetings. And somewhere along the way, he had lost her. He had never meant to. Maya had been one of the most important people in his life. But somehow, life happened, and their paths had split. At first, they had tried to keep in touch, text messages, a few phone calls. But as Ethan climbed the corporate ladder, his time became scarce. Eventually, the calls stopped. The messages slowed. And before he knew it, Maya had become a memory. But now, seeing her standing in front of him, wearing a faded apron, balancing plates instead of publishing books, something about it felt wrong. This wasn't the Maya he remembered. She had been brilliant, full of life. full of ambition. She had dreamed of traveling, writing, making a name for herself. So why was she here? Why was she waiting tables in a small diner, looking as if life had forced her to settle for something far less than what she deserved? And why, despite everything, did she still make his heart race, just like she used to? A few minutes later, Maya returned, this time without her tray. She sat across from him, adjusting her apron before letting out a small breath. "So," she said with a half smile, "Ethan Sinclair, CEO, billionaire, probably on the cover of Forbes. Did I miss anything?" Ethan smirked. "I'd say that covers the basics." Maya chuckled softly, but there was something guarded in her expression. "I heard about you, she admitted. "You're kind of hard to miss." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You've been keeping tabs on me?" Maya rolled her eyes. "Don't flatter yourself. You were all over the news when your company went public. Everyone from our college saw it." Ethan nodded, suddenly feeling a strange pang of guilt. He had been everywhere but never in her life. Not once had he stopped to think about where Maya was or how she was doing. He had assumed she was fine, that she was living her dream. But clearly, he had been wrong. "What about you?" he asked carefully. "How have you been?" Maya hesitated, just for a second. Then she forced a small smile. "Oh, life happens." Ethan didn't miss the way her fingers tightened around the napkin in her lap. Life happens. That wasn't an answer. That was a shield. A polite way of saying, "I don't want to talk about it." Ethan leaned forward slightly, studying her. "Come on, Maya. We were friends once." A real answer. Maya sighed, running a hand through her hair. She looked like she was debating how much to say. Finally, she spoke. "I was doing all right for a while," she admitted. "After college, I got a job at a publishing house. Not as a writer, but as an assistant. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start." Ethan listened intently, waiting for the part where things went wrong. Maya continued. "I worked there for 3 years, hoping to move up, but the company downsized, and I was let go." Ethan frowned. "That's awful." Maya gave a small shrug, as if she had long since accepted it. "It happens. Publishing isn't the easiest industry. I thought about trying to write my own book, but bills don't pay themselves." Ethan felt something heavy settle in his chest. She had given up on her dream. "What did you do after that?" he asked. Maya let out a short laugh that lacked any real humor. "I took whatever job I could. Retail, temp work, a little freelance writing on the side. Nothing that paid well enough to be stable." She gestured around the diner. "And eventually, I ended up here." Ethan's grip on his coffee cup tightened. This wasn't fair. Maya had worked hard. She had been one of the smartest, most determined people he had ever met, and yet, life had knocked her down again and again. And he hated it, because deep down, he knew that if he had just stayed in her life, maybe he could have helped. Maybe she wouldn't have had to struggle alone. Maya must have sensed the shift in his expression because she quickly added, "It's not as bad as it sounds. The job is steady. I have a roof over my head. I'm doing okay." But Ethan didn't believe her. Maya had never been the type to complain. She had always been the kind of person who made the best out of every situation. Which meant that if she was downplaying her struggles, they were probably worse than she was letting on. A million thoughts ran through Ethan's head. Should he offer to help her? No, she was too proud for that. Should he offer her a job? No, that would seem patronizing. But he couldn't just do nothing. He wouldn't. Not this time. Maya suddenly glanced at the clock on the wall and sighed. "I should get back to work. My break's almost over." Ethan didn't want the conversation to end not when there was so much left unsaid. But he forced a nod. "All right, but we're not done catching up." Maya gave him a skeptical look. "Ethan, I mean it," he said firmly. "You're not just going to disappear on me again." Something flashed in her eye, something that almost looked like hope. After a brief hesitation, she smiled. "Okay." Then she stood up, adjusting her apron before walking back toward the kitchen. Ethan watched her go, his mind racing. He had spent years making deals, reading people, uncovering hidden truths. And if there was one thing he knew for certain, Maya Evans was hiding something. And he wasn't leaving until he found out what. Because for the first time in a long, long time, Ethan Sinclair had finally found something more important than money. And he wasn't about to lose it again. Ethan sat in the booth long after Maya had walked away, staring at the coffee in his hands. The warmth had faded, leaving it lukewarm, just like the past they were trying to navigate. He had expected to feel nostalgic after seeing Maya again, but instead, he felt something else. Frustration, guilt, regret. Maya had dreamed of becoming a writer. She had been brilliant, full of ideas, full of hope, and yet life had pulled her away from all of that. And he had let it happen. He could have stayed in touch. He could have helped her, offered her a job, introduced her to people in the industry. But he had been too absorbed in his own success to even think about reaching out. Now, here she was, waiting tables in a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and greasy hash browns. It didn't make sense. Maya had been one of the most determined people he had ever met. She wouldn't have let go of her dreams so easily. Which meant something had happened. Something she wasn't telling him. Maya moved through the diner with practiced ease, balancing plates, refilling coffee, and smiling at customers like it was second nature. But every now and then, she glanced at Ethan. She had never expected to see him again. Ethan Sinclair, her best friend, the one person who had always believed in her, the one person who had once meant the world to her. And now? Now he was a billionaire, sitting in a booth like he didn't belong here because he didn't. He was used to high-rise offices, luxury hotels, and private jets. Not small-town diners with broken ceiling fans and customers who tipped in loose change. And yet, he had stayed. Maya could still feel the weight of his stare, the unspoken questions lingering between them. She had tried to keep the conversation light, but she could tell that Ethan saw through her. He had always been good at that, seeing past her walls, reading between the lines. And that scared her, because she wasn't ready to tell him the truth. Not yet. Maybe not ever. An hour passed, then another. Ethan waited patiently, watching as Maya worked. And the more he watched, the more it didn't add up. She was too smart for this, too talented. She didn't belong here. So why was she stuck in a place like this? By the time her shift ended, Ethan had already made up his mind. He wasn't leaving without answers. Maya walked out of the diner, pulling her coat tight against the chilly night air. She was exhausted, her feet sore from hours of standing. She had planned to go straight home, but then, need a ride? She froze. Turning, she found Ethan leaning against a sleek black car, his arms crossed. Maya sighed. Ethan, what? He shrugged. It's late. I'm just being a gentleman. Maya hesitated. She knew that if she got in that car, there would be questions. Questions she didn't want to answer. But she was tired, too tired to argue. So she sighed and muttered, "Fine." Ethan smirked in victory before opening the passenger door. The drive was silent at first. Ethan could feel the tension between them, thick, unspoken. Finally, he broke it. "So," he said casually, "you gonna tell me the real story now?" Maya frowned. "What real story?" Ethan glanced at her. "The one where you explain why you gave up on writing, why you're working at a diner instead of publishing your first novel." Maya tensed. "I told you life happened." "That's not an answer, Maya," Ethan said firmly. "That's an excuse." Maya's grip on her coat tightened. She knew Ethan wouldn't let this go. He never had. Back in college, whenever she doubted herself, whenever she wanted to give up, Ethan had always been the one to push her forward. But this wasn't college anymore. This was real life. And real life wasn't that simple. Ethan pulled up in front of an old apartment building, the kind with flickering street lights and peeling paint. Maya shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding his gaze. "This is me," she muttered. Ethan stared at the building, his jaw tightening. She lived here? In this rundown part of town? This wasn't the Maya he remembered. This wasn't the life she was meant to have. And it bothered him more than it should have. Maya reached for the door handle, but before she could leave, Ethan said softly, "Maya, what happened to you?" His voice was gentle but firm. Maya froze. For a moment, she considered lying, telling him that everything was fine, that she was happy, that she had chosen this life. But the look in Ethan's eyes, the quiet concern, the unspoken regret made it impossible to lie. She let out a breath. "I got engaged." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "You what?" Maya gave a sad smile. A few years ago, his name was Daniel. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Maya had been engaged? To someone else? Maya looked down at her hands. "He convinced me to move to this city with him, told me he'd take care of me, that I didn't have to worry about chasing my writing dreams because he would provide for us." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had seen this happen before, woman giving up her dreams for a man who never deserved her in the first place. "And?" he asked, his voice sharp. Maya's smile faded. "And it didn't work out." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Did he hurt you?" Maya hesitated, then softly, "Not in the way you think." Ethan understood immediately. Daniel hadn't hit her, but he had broken her in other ways. Made her feel small, made her believe she wasn't good enough, and Ethan hated him for it. Maya sighed. "By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. I had nothing left. No career, no money, no dreams, just bills to pay." Ethan's hands tightened into fists. Maya had always been strong. But this had destroyed her, and he hadn't been there to stop it. Silence filled the car. Finally, Maya let out a small laugh. "So, now you know. The great Maya Evans isn't so great after all." Ethan's gaze hardened. "No," he said quietly. "You're still great." Maya blinked, caught off guard. Ethan turned to face her fully. "You didn't fail, Maya. Someone else failed you. And I don't care how much time has passed, I'm not going to let you keep believing that you're stuck here." Maya swallowed hard. "Ethan, you can't just—" "Yes, I can," Ethan interrupted, "and I will." Maya stared at him, her heart pounding. Because for the first time in years, someone was fighting for her. And she wasn't sure if she should run from it or hold on to it for dear life. Maya sat in Ethan's car, gripping the fabric of her coat so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The air between them was thick, heavy, with unspoken words, regret, and something else. Something she wasn't sure she was ready to name. She had just told Ethan everything. Everything about Daniel. About how she had given up her dreams for a man who had never really loved her. How she had wasted years believing that she was meant for an ordinary life, one that didn't include books, publishing deals, or the future she had once imagined. And instead of pity, instead of the polite condolences she had come to expect from people, Ethan had looked at her with something far more dangerous. Determination. "No," he had said, his voice firm. "You're still great." And for the first time in years, someone was fighting for her. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or terrified. Maya let out a quiet sigh. "Ethan, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but—" "I'm not trying," Ethan cut in, his eyes locked onto hers, unwavering. "I'm doing it." Maya swallowed. She had forgotten how relentless he could be. How, once Ethan Sinclair made up his mind about something, he never backed down. She had seen it before, in college, when he was juggling classes, internships, and his first startup, when people told him he wouldn't make it, that he was too ambitious, too reckless. But he had proved them all wrong. And now, that same unyielding determination was being directed at her. And it scared her. Because she wasn't sure she was strong enough to believe in herself again. Not after everything. Ethan let out a slow breath, forcing himself to calm down. He could see the hesitation in Maya's eyes, the fear, the doubt. She had been hurt, and he needed to be careful. So instead of pushing her, he offered her a choice. "Come work for me." Maya's head snapped up. "What?" Ethan leaned forward slightly. "I own a publishing house." Maya blinked. "You... what?" Ethan smirked. "You really haven't been keeping up with me, have you?" Maya shook her head in disbelief. "Ethan, you own a tech company, not a publishing house." "I own both," Ethan said casually. 2 years ago, I bought a struggling publishing firm and turned it around. It's now one of the fastest-growing independent publishers in the country." Maya stared at him, completely stunned. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Ethan said. "And I want you to come work there." Maya's heart raced. "Ethan, I can't just..." "Why not?" he challenged. "You've got the experience. You worked in publishing before, and I know for a fact that you're one of the smartest people I've ever met." Maya shook her head. "That was years ago. I'm out of practice. So get back into practice." Maya let out a frustrated laugh. "Ethan, it's not that simple." "Why not?" he asked again, his voice gentle but firm. Maya hesitated. Because she was scared. Because after years of struggling, of feeling like a failure, she didn't know if she could survive another disappointment. "What if I'm not good enough?" she whispered. Ethan's expression softened. He reached out and placed a hand over hers. His touch was warm, sterile. "You are," he said simply. Maya looked down at their hands, feeling a strange lump rise in her throat. For years, she had been alone. For years, no one had told her she was good enough. And now here was Ethan Sinclairone, of the most powerful men in the country, offering her a job, a second chance. And she didn't know if she had the courage to take it. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Ethan sighed. "Look, I'm not forcing you to say yes, but at least think about it." Maya bit her lip. "I don't know, Ethan." Ethan studied her for a moment, then smirked. "I'll make it easy for you." Maya frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a plane ticket. Maya's eyes widened. "You." "It's for New York," he said. 1 week. Just come visit the company, see if it's something you'd be interested in." Maya stared at the ticket, her heart pounding. A week. Just a week. Could she really do this? Could she really step back into the world she had left behind? She swallowed hard. "Ethan, why are you doing this?" Ethan hesitated. Then, softly, "Because I should have been there for you before." Maya felt her breath hitch. She looked at Ethan, the man who had once been her best friend, the man she had thought she had lost forever. And in that moment, she realized something. Ethan wasn't just offering her a job. He was offering her a chance to believe in herself again. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to believe in him again, too. Maya took a shaky breath. Then, slowly, she reached out and took the ticket. "I'll think about it," she whispered. Ethan's lips curled into a small smile. "That's all I ask." But deep down, they both knew. Maya had already made her decision, and everything was about to change. Maya sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the plane ticket in her hands. The paper felt too light for something that carried so much weight, so much uncertainty. New York, a city she had once dreamed of conquering, but had long since convinced herself was beyond her reach. Now, after years of struggling, years of settling, Ethan had handed her a second chance. All she had to do was take it. So why was she so afraid? Her fingers tightened around the ticket, because deep down she knew if she stepped onto that plane, there would be no going back. No more hiding behind excuses. No more pretending that she was okay with the life she had been forced into. And that terrified her. Because what if she failed again? She had already lost so much. Could she really survive losing more? Maya let out a shaky breath, closing her eyes. Then, sudden a knock at the door. She startled. Who? Another knock. Firmer this time. Maya hesitated before standing up and walking to the door. Slowly, she unlocked it and pulled it open and froze. Because standing there, looking infuriatingly confident, was Ethan Sinclair. Maya blinked. Ethan? Ethan smirked. Hey. She frowned. What are you doing here? Ethan lifted a small duffel bag, making sure you don't back out. Maya stared at him. You're serious? Completely. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, studying her. You were about to talk yourself out of it, weren't you? Maya opened her mouth to deny it, but she couldn't. Because he was right. Ethan sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Maya, I know you. I know you're scared. But I also know that staying here, doing the same thing over and over, isn't making you happy. Maya looked away. And what if going to New York doesn't make me happy either? Then at least you'll know, Ethan said simply. At least you'll have tried. Maya swallowed. The worst part was, he was right. Again. Ethan exhaled. Listen, the flight leaves in 3 hours. You don't have to decide right this second, but I'll be waiting in the car. Maya's heart pounded. You're coming with me? Ethan gave her a look. Did you really think I'd send you off alone? Maya didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Ethan tilted his head. I'll give you 10 minutes. And with that, he turned and walked back down the hallway. Maya stood frozen in the doorway, staring after him. And then, before she could stop herself, she turned, grabbed her suitcase, and started packing. The plane ride was quiet at first. Ethan worked on his laptop while Maya stared out the window, her thoughts racing. She had spent so long convincing herself that this life, a small apartment, a dead-end job, a routine that never changed, was all she deserved. And now, for the first time in years, she was daring to hope for more. Penny for your thoughts? Ethan's voice pulled her back to reality. Maya hesitated before sighing. I'm just overwhelmed. Ethan shut his laptop and turned to face her fully. Good overwhelmed or bad overwhelmed? Maya let out a soft laugh. Both. Ethan studied her for a moment. You know, when I first started my company, I was terrified. Maya raised an eyebrow. Ethan Sinclair? Terrified? Ethan smirked. Hard to believe, I know. But it's true. I had no idea if I'd succeed. I had no safety net, no guarantees. Just a dream. Maya listened carefully. Ethan leaned back. I almost quit, more than once. But then I realized something fear means you're about to do something important. Maya swallowed. And what if I fail? Ethan held her gaze. Then you try again. Maya felt something inside her shift, because maybe, just maybe, was right. New York was overwhelming. The moment they landed, everything felt louder, faster, bigger. Maya had forgotten what it was like to be surrounded by so much energy. Ethan's publishing company, Sinclair Literary, was nothing like she had expected. It wasn't some massive corporate machine. It was sleek, modern, and filled with passionate people who loved books as much as she did. And the more time she spent there, the more she realized she still loved this world. By the third day, Ethan called her into his office. So, he said, what do you think? Maya took a deep breath. I think I want to try. Ethan grinned. That's all I needed to hear. Maya hesitated. Ethan, why are you doing all this for me? Ethan's expression softened. Because I should have been there for you before. And because I believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself. Maya felt something tighten in her chest. Because no one had ever said that to her before. Not like this. And suddenly, she realized this wasn't just about her career. This was about them. About everything that had been left unsaid between them for years. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running from it. 2 months later, Maya sat in a coffee shop, staring at the email on her screen. Manuscript approved for publishing. She exhaled sharply. It was happening. Her book was getting published. She barely had time to process it before her phone rang. Ethan, she answered immediately. Did you see? I saw, Ethan said, his voice warm. I'm proud of you, Maya. Maya felt her heart stumble. She hesitated before whispering, "I wouldn't have done it without you." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then softly, "You would have. You just needed someone to remind you of who you are." Maya swallowed past the lump in her throat. "Ethan, yeah?" For the first time in a long time, Maya didn't feel afraid. So she took a leap. "I think I'm in love with you." Silence. Maya's heart raced. "Ethan?" Then soft laughter. "Good." Maya blinked. "Good?" "Because I've been in love with you for years," Ethan admitted. "I was just waiting for you to catch up." Maya felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. For the first time in forever, she felt light. She didn't know what the future would hold. But for the first time, she was ready to find out. Because this time, she wasn't alone.